Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event here at Baker Bookhouse. We are so excited for the launch of Tiffany Bluhm's new book, Pray Tell. We've been excited about this launch night for a while now, and it's finally here. You can buy the book online at bakerbookhouse.com. If you already have your copy, the links will be going into the chat throughout the evening. Any questions you might have, by all means, throw them into the comments, into the Q&A, and we'll send them over to the ladies, and they will get to those throughout the evening. Tonight, Tiffany is being joined by her friend and editor, Katelyn. They are going to be having a conversation, and we get to listen in and ask questions as we will. We're super excited to have these ladies here. So Katelyn and Tiffany, whenever you guys want to hop on, we're welcome to have you. Again, thank you all so much for being here. Hello, Katelyn and Tiffany. All right, so I'm gonna let the ladies take it away. Everyone, enjoy your evening.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Becky, for that invitation. And Tiffany, I've been counting down the days for this event launch. Your book, Pray Tell, Why We Silence Women Who Tell the Truth and How Everyone Can Speak Up, just came out a couple days ago. And there's been so much anticipation with the Brazos press team about its launch. And just, I love the cover, the title, everything about it. And of course, the contents as well. And we are going to talk about the contents tonight. But first, I remember us having a meeting at a coffee shop in New York, which seems like forever ago.
Another world, yeah.
In 2019, and we had just signed you for this book, and the title in the proposal was Pray Tell, P-R-E-Y, Tell. And I was like, we obviously have to use this title. And you've told me this title has gotten a lot of response. So how did you come up with that?
Yeah, so my husband and I were trying to think of different ways to use the word pray, but have it be in common language that we've all heard, but maybe change the words, especially because it had a spiritual bent. So anywhere we could use P-R-E-Y and P-R-A-Y. And then he looked at me, he's like, pray tell. Pray tell. And we both just were like, oh, that's it. And I was like, change the tagline all you want, change anything else, but please let me keep this title. It's too good. And it's one of those things that I've had people reach out to me just on social media and emailing me and just saying, man, that title, wow, that just catches you. You can't forget it. So I'm glad it slaps.
It indeed slaps. And it sounds like we have your husband in part to thank for the brainstorming.
And he is always reminding me that he is the one who thought of it in case I get asked and I decide to switch the story. He's like, just remind who came up with that.
Who was it? It was
yeah.
So tell me about, was there like a moment in your life over the last several years when you knew that you had to write a book on abuses of power in the church and organization and how those abuses affect women? Was there a moment, a lightning bolt, like a vision?
I first just want to say I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. I believe you are as well. And I'm not one to really rock the boat for fear of falling out or for fear of being thrown overboard. So I'm honestly the last person on earth who I ever thought would write something that even just appears controversial. It wasn't really my thing. But the moment I realized, like, man, I think that I've got some gas in the tank for this, was talking with a friend who experienced just outrageous abuse of power, and she suffered quite a bit. And I watched her suffer, but also experienced my own suffering, and realizing that as I grappled with the societal, financial, spiritual, and communal losses of speaking truth to power, that as I came on the other side of that, and through therapy and through scripture and through prayer and through community care, this lesson I had learned, it just wasn't for me. It wasn't to be hoarded, and my understanding to just be for my story alone. It wasn't for my healing exclusively. I truly believe that if we could unearth why these things happen, because as you know, we see it on Christianity Today or CNN or BBC News, and we're like, why didn't anybody say anything? Why didn't anybody speak up? Or, oh, they just must, they let anyone get away with anything these days. And in reality, there's so much more to it than that. And women can often feel so trapped. So once I found my own voice and felt unleashed and emboldened to use it, I wanted to give that same permission to other people.
Yeah, that's really good. How part of the impetus for the book was recognizing that it wasn't just about recognizing your own story and
Yeah.
experience and giving voice to that, but there was this other woman who was suffering in a similar way, and seeing the power of when like one person goes first,
That's
that
right.
gives other people courage to say, I mean, to say me too, to say,
Yeah.
yes, this is my experience too. This also happened to me, or I've witnessed this. But it takes a lot of courage. And, you know, I'm an Enneagram 3. This means we're achievers. um, and there can be significant costs to
Yeah.
speaking out. And this gets into one of the things that you say early on in the book. You say, as you're reflecting on your own experiences, I mastered silencing my own voice in order to be of value to the world around me, especially to the men who employed or pastored me. So this idea of mastering silencing your own voice, like when you look back on those experiences, why did silence seem like the best option available? And I don't mean that in a like, why didn't you speak up sooner?
Right.
But
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
how did that silence, what was it providing for you? Or what did you think it was giving you in that time?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think one, first, for myself and so many others who are in a similar situation, silence feels like self-preservation. Silence feels like the only way you can control the narrative or the situation you find yourself in that feels outrageous, and it feels like there's no way to solve this problem
Mm,
without pain or without hardship or without feeling like I'm going to lose everything I hold precious and dear. And so
mhm,
silence feels like control.
mm,
Silence feels like the only way to stay afloat when you know that to speak up and to speak an unpopular truth will require other people to be called to the carpet for their actions and take responsibility. But it will also put people you love in the crossfire. And nobody wants to intentionally hurt the people they love. Like, no healthy person would do that. But knowing that silence feels like not only am I protecting myself, I'm protecting the people I care for.
mm.
It makes you feel this false sense of protection, and in reality, you're perpetuating harm in a way that you would not wish on your worst enemy.
Mm. Thinking about if I speak out against my employer or an organizational leader or a community member or a church member, it's not just going to fall back on me, it's going to fall back on my family and friends and people I'm connected to. And maybe convincing yourself, like, I can't do it on, I'm being silent on their behalf, like for their
Yes.
good, because I want to protect them. But over time, I mean, obviously, one of the big themes of your book is that silence has a cost.
Yeah.
It's not control. It doesn't provide the control that you long for, you think it will give you. So, like, what is the cost of
Yeah.
staying silent or not speaking up?
Absolutely. So, Michael Slepian, he is a researcher at Columbia. He says, we don't keep secrets. We don't keep silence. Secrets and silence keep us. They control us. They can create such anxiety, depression. They can really affect our mental and emotional state, how we see ourselves, how we see others, and for a believer, how you see God and how you operate in the world, because you feel like you only belong if you can keep this to yourself. And here's the thing, Katelyn, this starts really young. Research shows
Mm,
children as young as 24 months old will stay silent and keep secrets for those who've harmed them if they believe that those who've harmed them somehow have their best interest at heart.
mm,
So it can, I think for me in my formative years being a woman of color in a predominantly white community, I so badly wanted to belong and would contort myself in a way that would be pleasing to those who sounded and acted, preached and looked and dressed like dominant culture. And I
mm,
didn't do it in this fear of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be rejected for the rest of my life. Simply just to exist in spaces and to have opportunity is why I did that. But I can see how now that mixed with honestly purity culture, growing up in the evangelical church um, really set me up for a fail when it came to speaking up on behalf of what I knew and how I'd been harmed, but also for how the women in my world had been harmed. And so now we talk about the cost. I think when you count the cost, you have to count your proximity to power. In my own personal
mm,
situation, I benefited from a broken system. I benefited from a system where younger women, women who had aptitude or skills that could be seen as showy, being a woman of color, there was a performative nature to my position. It checked a box for someone else. I was meeting someone else's agenda, and therefore I had compensation for that in the way of opportunity, platform, a well spoken of reputation. But again, that was something I treasured. And so to count the cost meant knowing that I was on behalf of someone else, seeing this ethical, moral, Christian responsibility to speak up on someone else's behalf, knew that I would likely lose those things. And I more than did. In my situation, I was the breadwinner for my home. I was a community member who was well known enough in the area that I live to know that I would be speaking up against some powerful people. And when you speak truth to power and you're seen as disposable and the men in power are seen as indispensable, that's a cost that you will pay that you will not always see on the other side that was worth it. But to know in the flesh, in that moment, especially when you're losing out financially and all of those things, but to know that you were obedient, to know that you can be loyal to your convictions over loyal to a man or an institution or an entity or a way of life that's not serving the whole, is worth the cost. And there's reasons we silence, right? It's advantageous for dominant culture. It's advantageous for the patriarchy, for women to be silenced. History shows that every major advance has really been, it's been necessary for the subjugation and silence of women from the Industrial Revolution to, especially in the last 100 years in wartime, to have women play the role of come and work, low wages. I think of World War II that I talk about in the book, come to work, do what we need you to do, and then we're going to dispose of you when you're done. And they had poor working rights and subject to sexual harassment and assault and all of these things. Women have been the gas in the tank, but they haven't always been treated with respect and dignity when they've spoken up. So there is a cost to that. And often it's the he said, she said situation that so many of us find ourselves in. But again, it doesn't negate the need to address the system, because when one woman speaks up, we'd love to believe that she did something to deserve whatever happened to her, because it's easier to victim blame than it is to address the system as a whole that needs re-architected in a way that serves everyone.
Wow. There's so much there. I want to go back to 5 different things. Kind of because it's one of my pet peeves / hobby horses / things that I think about a lot. You had touched on purity culture, and that's something that you also touch on in the book. Talk a little bit about, in your own upbringing, maybe especially as a woman of color, trying to find your space in white dominant culture. How do you think purity culture shaped you or misshaped you to prepare you to speak up for yourself and speak up against abuses of power later in life?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There was a lot I gleaned from that season of life, what to look for in a potential mate, guardrails in relationships, the dangers of pornography. There were so many things that were beneficial to me, and I'm very grateful for that. But with that came a lot of messaging that said you are responsible for a man's downfall or choices, and men only do dirty things to dirty girls, and men are just raging lustful beasts that can't control themselves. Therefore, it's on the women, it's on the girls. And mind you, we're getting these messages at 13 and 14 years old as we're going through puberty. So there's this understanding that you are responsible for someone else's downfall, which is erroneous in itself. And also this, you're a budding young girl thinking, oh my gosh, I hold a lot of power. I don't want to cause somebody to sin. And the grievous nature of that was so heavy. And then I think you add that layer of being a woman of color and the stereotypes that are associated with that we're hypersexual, that we're subservient, that we will do or perform things that other people would, that white women wouldn't stand for, that only made things more complicated in my understanding of what purity actually meant and what equality, gendered equality meant. So this upbringing that you see from the first century, the Greco-Roman influence in the early church, that, women are deformed men, or a woman's body is the presence of evil in the world, how that really took off in the church with the early church fathers. And you see that played out in our modern day. And you see generations of women who felt so ashamed. In fact, research shows, Katelyn, I'm sure you've heard this or read about this, that those who grew up in the thick of the purity culture movement, who never had any past experience with sexual abuse, had the same PTSD symptoms that those who have been sexually abused. I mean, this is dangerous stuff that we're talking about. So that belief that anything I wore or said or the way I carried myself was the reason for my mistreatment, I took that into the workplace, Katelyn. So when here I was in my 20s and a man would comment like, "Oh girl, you wearing that dress today," or, "Oh, you shouldn't have worn that today. You know what that does to me." When those things were said to me, I thought to myself,
like, just to be clear, these actual things were said to you.
Oh yes. And I've heard, as I've shared these things, so many women have come back with like, "Oh my gosh, I remember getting hit on the butt by my employer, or, my boss at Burger King, or these things," and just feeling like, what did I do to deserve this? We've internalized this shame. Victim blaming is so baked into the bread that I'm eating that bread and this is in me and I'm believing this. So here I was, in the workforce, and these things were said to me. And I thought to myself, Katelyn, man, I shouldn't have worn this dress today. I shouldn't have worn these earrings today.
It is so weird that you're touching on this. And I think it's probably because obviously there have been a lot of conversations recently about purity culture and teachings about sexuality in the church, and seeing women as temptations. The horrific news out of the Atlanta area.
Exactly.
We're thinking and talking about the ways that white evangelical communities sexualize and blame women, especially women of color.
Sure.
And so it's just been like in my mind a lot this week. And I remembered early on in my career, I had worn, I don't know, it was a dress to work. And someone who was in a position of authority over me commented on it. And I was really uncomfortable. And I remember meeting with a few women in a small group that night and telling them what had happened, that he had said something, he's position of authority, like my dad's age, what do I do? And my first instinct in my conversation with these girlfriends was, I need to think about what I'm wearing to work. I need to be more careful. And a friend who's older than me and just had more life experience said, like, I'm actually concerned that you're putting this back on yourself. It's not your responsibility in your dress, to prevent someone from saying something inappropriate to you in a workplace setting. But it was so instinctual to think, like, what did I do wrong? And that's just such a minor example of the ways that a really malformed version of purity culture blames women for men's misdeeds or, abuses of power. So I'm going to stop.
And then you see how, you hit the nail on the head. You see that, and then you see the shooting in Atlanta, that women were to be eliminated because they were a temptation. You see that pendulum, and this is not to be taken lightly. And the fact that, even just as you said, the initial, that final response was, man, I should consider what I'm wearing. And that's, I talk a little bit about in the book that rape culture and purity culture are often asking the same questions. And they both demonize women as something to be conquered, subjugated, pursued. Even the benevolent nature at which we approach that, I think there's still some danger to that. And it's interesting. I've been asked quite a lot lately, well, what's too far? A man can't compliment a woman. And my response to this was, could you not compliment her aptitude? Could you not compliment her abilities? Must you compliment her physical body? I think how just awkward that would be for me to comment on a man's appearance or the way he looked in a suit. Don't get me wrong, there's some men who look mighty fine in suits, but it doesn't mean I need to go saying it and putting it out there and making anyone feel uncomfortable. There's no room for that.
Well, it's just interesting how it becomes twisted into like, I can't do this anymore. And it's like, I feel like it's a small thing to give up in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. And especially from a Christian perspective, if you think your intent is like kind or respectful, or you're just paying someone a compliment. Who doesn't want a compliment?
Yeah.
But you learn that the impact is not the intent that you have,
That's
that
right.
it makes someone uncomfortable. Don't you just, isn't it a loving thing to do and a respectful thing to do to refrain to do the thing that makes someone uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And so I just, it seems like such a small thing for men to have to give up, is like commenting on women's dress.
I completely agree. But then can we pause on this for just a second? Sorry, this wasn't in the script. But I think about, then we hear, a few weeks ago, this pastor in Missouri who is saying, there's a divorce weight on women, that's an idea his friend gave him. And why do women let themselves go after they get married? So for many of us, we grew up in this culture where we were taught that, modesty is the hottest way to go, and be so careful because you could cause a man to stumble. And this weight that was put on our shoulders, this undue shame. And then we hear this man talk about, you're not hot enough, and talking about how, and he's really talking about this implicit belief that a woman, and a wife in this case, a Christian wife, is a man's exterior validation, this prize that he has. If he was able to keep himself pure, if he was able to live this victorious, righteous life, look what reward he gets. She's this more of like a prized pig than his equal. And so I think we're getting just so many conflicting messages, and this, kind of that smoking hot wife syndrome that many pastors have, right? But what we heard as youth, and if you didn't grow up in evangelical purity culture, bless you. I'm sure that there's tons of other things we could talk about that would have been hard growing up. But what we heard was, you need to be modest. You could cause somebody to stumble, but you better be smoking hot. And this is the status you should ascribe to. And this is the ultimate goal, to be the prize for these boys who were able to keep it together and not let their lustful ways get the best of themselves. There was just some conflicting messages. And again, both a slander and silence, and treat women so poorly, and does not give a whole vision for God's plan for women.
Yeah, I mean, it's the double bind of, you must, in either way, women are responsible for keeping men sexually on the right moral path.
And happy.
So,
yeah.
Yes. And so if you need to be modest and pure before marriage, and then within marriage, you have to be like,
a goddess, apparently.
A goddess, or your husband will cheat. And as someone is commenting in the chat message right now, it comes back to this fundamental belief that men are these naturally lustful beasts. They can't control themselves. So if they do act out, like, who can really blame them? Because they're just men. And, we have excused men's bad behavior for a long time.
Yeah. There's a line in the book I talk about. I quote a professor, I believe he's from the Midwest, and he's a religious studies professor. Samuel Perry, I believe, is his name. And he talks about that struggling with sexual sin is a mark of Christian masculinity. This is like, I'm part of the team now because I struggle with this and I can't control myself. And I've given into temptation. And that just proves I'm a godly man, almost, so there's just, we've
there's
given
like a weird incentive for, like,
the bar is low.
Like there's a weird incentive for talking about, like, struggling.
Yeah. And that almost validates your identity as a Christian male.
Because at least you're struggling and not giving in, but you're also like a lusty male. Nobody's going to mistake you for being emasculated.
Admit that you can't control yourself. Therefore, it's a woman's job to control herself and to control you.
It's almost like someone should write a whole book on purity culture. I mean, there are a lot out there, but there's a lot more to say. And that is not the primary topic of Pray Tell, but it is a really important part of the larger conversation of how Christian cultures are shaping men and women. So we have some really good questions coming in to the Q&A function. So thanks to all of you who have joined us tonight. If you're just joining us, we are talking about Tiffany Bluhm's excellent book, Pray Tell, Why We Silence Women Who Tell the Truth and How Everyone Can Speak Up. There will be a link to bakerbookhouse.com added to the box. Somewhere there will be a box and there will be a link, and you'll be able to go to it and get a copy of Pray Tell. not only for yourself, but for maybe a man in your life, which we're going to get to shortly. But let's take a couple comments. So this was a really interesting comment from Katie, hi, Katie. I thought this was really interesting when we're talking about organizational dynamics. If you find yourself in an organization where there is a toxic personality, toxic leadership, in your experience or in observations you've made, Tiffany, about the more systemic issues that we're dealing with, has abuse of power included like a triangulation, pitting people against each other to take the attention off the toxic or abusive leader, dividing people who might otherwise speak up, going behind, like talking badly about someone who you might suspect is going to try to take you down? And how do you deal with that? Have you seen that? How do you navigate that?
Absolutely. I think the best way for a toxic leader to thrive is to pit people against each other, especially people that want to please that person. Or I'm going to use male pronouns because most of the book is describing male toxic power. So when you have a man in power who wants to stay in power and who wants to maintain and require and sometimes demand loyalty from all, he will often pit people against each other. He will often talk publicly, slander someone who's not in the room but would normally be in the room, who will manipulate, triangulate, but really deflecting because if this person's behavior is so toxic and poor, it surely makes sense to make somebody else that scapegoat, make somebody else the reason for everything going wrong, but look at their issues, constant deflecting to see how they're the reason, they're the problem. And I think a way that you really see this play out is when you see those who are enabling kind of drink that Kool-Aid and will also deflect and defend that toxic person, even though, Katelyn, even though they've been harmed. Even though they've been harmed by that system, that there's that corporate Stockholm syndrome, if you will. They're willing to defend a man who has even abused his power at their expense, just because they would rather do that than partner with somebody who they've been pitted against. And I think this is particularly painful, which I was really looking forward to talking about this, when it's women against women. I think there's a unique hell that women go through when they're pitted against each other. I think you see this when one woman is elevated into leadership positions, but not others. So others are watching one woman get opportunity, resource, platform, and increased reputation, but they're not. And so they want what she has, and they're told that they need to do this, or if they were just like her, or those kind of things. I think it can also be, there's those things of like, oh, nobody gets me like you, but did you know how they do it? Well, they don't think very well of you. So just really your everyday gossip and slander in the workplace. But when it's coming from the top, there's a unique harm because your paycheck is dependent on playing that game. You feel trapped in the system. If you have so much at stake, your reputation, or you feel like there's no easy way out, that can be a really unique harm. And that you can see this. We saw this at Google with Andy Rubin when he was abusing his power, creator of the Android phone. And he got a $90 million payout when he coerced a low-level employee into sexual acts, and nobody really knew about it, but some people knew about it, but some people felt jealous that she had more attention by Andy than other people. I mean, there was just all of this pitting against each other. But then you also see this in the McDonald's case, where thousands of women have come forward against their managers who are coercing them into the bathroom on their 10-minute break, but then feeling jealous that those gals got promoted into more managerial positions. I mean, there's just so much pitting against, but when you're dangling the carrot of a promotion or increased pay or whatever, what have you, it's a certain kind of awful, if you will, where you feel like I can only stay in this, and I can only stay in my superior's good graces if I play this sick, twisted game. And if I'm willing to hate who he hates, and I'm willing to turn on who he turns on, even though I might care for these people or might think well of these people. You saw this with Roger Ailes when one woman speaks up and she had audio evidence that he was a monster, and other women defended him and felt like, oh, but she had all of this power and all of this prestige, and how dare she, abuse that power. So I think it is advantageous for a toxic leader, superior man to deflect and pit people against each other because it maintains his position.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
everyone is believing his telling of events.
Mhm. Well, that's the ultimate of power, the ability to control the narrative and
That's
control
right.
people's perception of reality. I also think about the use of loyalty, loyalty to
Mhm.
the leader, loyalty to the organization, loyalty to the church, to a denomination, to a community, um, and being made to feel like anybody who isn't 100% on board with what the leader wants to do, their loyalty is questioned,
Yeah.
and that puts them farther into harm's way in terms of some kind of blowback. And it goes without saying that any kind of leader who demands 100% loyalty all the time is a toxic leader, and that's a toxic culture.
Yeah.
But it sounds like from your experience and other women's experience, it's like a trade that it's a rationale that you kind of make
Right.
in the moment of, I know this is a toxic culture. I like my coworkers. I do care about the organization, but how much longer can I live under this person's uh, reign, and how long can I deal with this, and at what cost? And so one of the questions that's come in is, well, how do you prepare? What's a good way to prepare to lose people? That, I guess that could be
Yeah.
friends, coworkers, people in the church, people who follow you on social media, or who you have some kind of influence over. Those people, how do you, when you speak up, you're going to lose people. How do you prepare for that?
I think we can't have that conversation until we explore loyalty a little bit more. So let's just, I
Hmm.
want to camp on that if you don't mind, and then I'll
Yeah.
segue into that. I
Yeah.
think loyalty can look a lot like narcissism. I think, it was Nancy Beach when she left Willow in the Chicago Tribune interview, and she talked about nobody had given me more opportunity and nobody had exploited my loyalty more.
Mm.
And I think, there's a reason loyalty isn't a fruit of the spirit. And I think that demand for loyalty is often praised as a supreme leadership quality. And in reality, it grooms those in that system or that particular institution to really be pushed past their convictions, past their what they're really okay with. And then they find themselves in this place, well, I'm so deep into this, I don't know where to go now. I don't know what to do now. My whole world is predicated on my loyalty to this toxic person. And that's a dangerous place to find yourself. I've found myself in that place. And so I think that it's a slippery slope, because I think loyalty on the outside, you're like, of course, I want to be a loyal person. I want to be a loyal friend. I want to be a loyal employee. But that is just so easily exploited and so easily taken advantage of. And I know I can think of many leaders, and I'm sure you can too, where loyalty was heralded above character. It was of any responsibility to themselves or to the greater good. It was loyalty overall. That's who was elevated. That's who was promoted. It wasn't the sharpest, wasn't the smartest. It wasn't the most well-read. It wasn't the most equipped for the role. It was those who were loyal, even if they were outrageously under-equipped to handle whatever they were handed. Loyalty was the be-all, end-all. And so with that, when you find yourself in a system where loyalty is everything, and again, I want to kind of shift here into some narcissistic tendencies to look for. Again, that narcissistic tendencies masked as loyalty can look like a distorted understanding of reality, where this person's view of the world is the view of the world. And if you don't see it from their point of view, you're just flat out wrong. A lack of empathy, not being able to see other people's point of view or their particular lot in life. It can be where you are necessary and needed and kept close for the advancement of that person's agenda. But once you are no longer useful, they no longer need you, care for you, wish for your well-being and your goodness in the world. So there's some things to look for there. And then I think when you are in this place, whether it's a church, whether it's, wherever you work or worship or occupy, and you find yourself feeling like, I've been loyal, I've played by all the rules set out for me by this work culture, this church culture, what have you, this ministry culture, and you realize it's time to leave, know that there's no easy way. There's no easy way to do that. I was told, Katelyn, when I sensed impropriety, like, oh, well, will there be ears to hear your concerns? And I said, no. And this person said, well, then just walk away and don't do anything about it. Don't say anything. Just exit the situation. And while I don't really believe that was bad advice, on the surface, there was so much more harm and institutional harm. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's likely not happening to one person. It's likely happening to many people. And so there is a cost to that to count. And if you're in a place where you feel like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I could handle losing my community, losing my income, losing my 401k, losing my health insurance, because we live in America and our health insurance is tied to our job. If I'm not into a place where I feel like I can lose all that, I would encourage you, call someone who can lend their strength. In my own situation, I did not feel brave enough to speak up and feel like I could face the music until someone said, you don't have to go through this alone. I'll walk with you every step of the way. Whether that's calling superiors, whether that's writing up reports, whether that's sitting and investigating, whatever your situation would have been, in my situation, in your situation, whoever's watching or listening, know that you don't, I think the fear comes from feeling like you have to do it alone. Because if it's the he said, she said, you feel disposable. You feel like you won't be believed. You'll be seen as a traitor, as a betrayer, or somebody who's against the work of that institution or against the work of the gospel, God forbid. And so allow others to lend their strength to you. Allow someone who's maybe not immediately in that situation to come with you. And then also, you know what? There are going to be relationships lost. People take sides. It's just the way it is. And I think I was pleasantly surprised that when the dust settled, how many relationships have been restored. The years the locusts have eaten have been restored in a lot of ways. And so there is going to be follow-up, because that's just life. That's just toxic cultures. And when people are embedded in that and they feel like this is right, they don't see the toxicity that maybe perhaps you do, there is going to be loss. And it's just unavoidable. And I know that's not a bright and shiny answer, but being loyal to your convictions over loyal to that community is wise and it's healthy. And it's necessary for your own health, but also the future health of that organization.
Okay, I want to go back to so many things. So your comment, loyalty is not a fruit of the spirit. Lots of response to that.
Oh, good.
And I think where it gets confused, especially in Christian culture, faithfulness is a fruit of the spirit, right? But faithfulness, ultimately, if it is inspired by the Holy Spirit, is about faithfulness to God.
That's right.
And to God's design for goodness and flourishing for every person, right? And so in these situations, there's a spiritual testing as well, like who demands my ultimate loyalty. That's right. And to come up against someone who seems to have this like godlike power in your life, who's like whittled their way into your brain in that way, it takes a lot of strength that I believe comes from the Holy Spirit.
It's a lot to uncross those wires, isn't it? When those wires have been crossed, I think, wouldn't you say, especially if you've had a positive spiritual experience at that person's leading, I think that can also make it feel some sort of way of like, I'm betraying the person who's led me closer to the Lord. I think it's a lot to unpack, that somebody would be capable of goodness and generosity and benevolence and leadership and leading me closer to the Lord. Now, obviously, we're specifically speaking of sacred spaces, but then also be capable of vile behavior and taking advantage of his position and his platform. I mean, we're seeing this with Ravi and Carl Lentz, and every week there's somebody new we could talk about, honestly. But we're seeing people's inability to grapple with the dissonant reality that people are capable of both good and evil. I joke this is something that Shonda Rhimes has nailed, but somehow as believers, we default to trust. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we want to trust the people who are leading us spiritually. But when that's weaponized, it's easy to mine our own brain and employ that confirmation bias, looking for reasons that we still believe this person is good, because we don't want to believe that we entrusted loyalty to someone who didn't deserve it.
Right. These stories that, have come out of spiritual communities, especially over the last several years, I think it's so hard for a lot of Christians to make sense of them, because, you know, you mentioned Ravi Zacharias, we talked about Willow Creek earlier on. I remember sharing this very vetted, thorough report that Christianity Today published when that happened, and just shared it on my Facebook page and just kind of outlined, here's what the report is telling us. And multiple people in my thread said, I just can't believe it, because I wouldn't have come to Jesus if it were not for the preaching of the lead pastor. And it's just, I mean, that is a heartbreaking place to be in, to try to wrap your mind around the fact that a spiritual leader can do good and also be capable of really awful things. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it reveals, I mean, it connects to the way that we put leaders on pedestals, spiritual pedestals, and the way that a lot of leaders ask to be put on those pedestals. So that,
or demand it.
So, but it is so hard to wrap our minds around. And this is actually leading to a question that you mentioned, Tiffany, that some people have asked you when they hear your story and they read about this book. Like, they say, I'm just shocked that you're still a Christian, that you still love Jesus.
Yeah.
After all that you've been through.
Yeah.
And how do you respond to that?
I think, like you said, when we hear of harm by an abusive spiritual leader, it's so jarring. And I was a gal who played by all of evangelical culture's rules. I like lettered in youth group. Okay. I was all in it to win it. This was my safe space. And I think I'm grateful for the foundation I had, to be honest. It was so well built. And I think it, honestly, although those formative years, especially, you know, in purity culture, they did lead me to believe that if something bad happened, it was because I did something to deserve it. It also gave me eyes to see that everyone's human, right? We're all human. We all know this, but nobody is above sin, and nobody is above making stupid decisions. And I think this also plays into, and I want to answer your question. I promise I will, but I think something that's been often said to me and so many other women who've spoken up in specifically faith spaces is, you're hurting the witness of the church. You are, you know, you are really dimming the light. And that was so harmful. I think it, you know, the first experience of any woman getting brave enough to speak up. But I think that second punch of the system that enables a predator or a perpetrator of power, or that will be complicit in those systems, puppets of the patriarchy, I call them. Task rabbits was a close second, as you know. But I really feel like we have to be able to see that unchecked power is going to cause harm in any system. This is a predictable pattern that we can see in the church, in business, education, politics, entertainment. This is a predictable pattern of unchecked power, unchecked misogyny, a lack of accountability, you know, those who have ascended to a place of power shedding the virtues that got them there in the first place, and misusing that power. And research even shows that men who have increased power will often see themselves as more sexually desirable and seek out sexual misconduct and affairs. I mean, that's documented research. So for me now, I see that as not all men. As not all men. You know, I don't think that's the majority of men. I truly believe that if we're all created in the image of God, we can work together, and the church is still a really good idea. And it still is a place where we can flourish in our faith, and a place where the faithful can gather and worship, but also, you know, there's a necessity to hold us all accountable. So I love the church, and I'm also here critiquing the church. I still believe in the church because Jesus is the head of it.
Yeah, and ultimately, when I read your book, Tiffany, which I did more than once, and listen to you speak, I sense that everything that you're saying and bringing to light, even the hard things and the dark things and the things that might sound harsh to some ears, is coming from a place of wanting to refine the church and make it a place that is reflecting the beauty of what God intended for it.
Okay.
And so to talk openly about abuses of power is not about tearing down the church or tearing down God's people. It's about refining that community so that it more brilliantly reflects what we believe it is supposed to be as a place of witness on the earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that takes men and women working together, which is why I love that you shared, read this, but buy this for the men in your world. This is something that we all need tools to understand how this happens and how, male fragility, male toxicity can contribute to these things, and how women have internalized that patriarchy. And we've also been complicit when we have that proximity to power, and how we can work together to ensure equitable spaces for all God's children, all God's children.
We have some really good, long, thoughtful questions coming in. And since we only have about 15 minutes left, I want to make sure that we get to some of them. This is a great question from Catherine Talley Matt. So this is like, okay, moving forward, preparing or having our eyes open. What are some red flags to look out for before joining a staff or an organization? What questions would be good in an interview? What are some of the signs to look out for and good questions to ask of people in positions of power?
Yeah, what a great question. I've heard you talk about this as well, of what to look for. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. But I think I actually detail a bit of a checklist in the book of what to look for when you sense an imbalance of power, or when you're sensing what it's like for people to, when you sense impropriety. And of course, that's already, if you're already established in those environments, what to look for. But I think if you were in an interview, and I think that's also, there's privilege in that question. If this is the only job you can get, it's hard to feel like you have options. So I do want to acknowledge that some of us have more privilege than others to be able to look and ask these questions. But I think you ask the women in the room what it's really like working here. I think asking, is there a reporting system? Ask the basic nuts and bolts questions. Do you have an anonymous reporting system? Who does HR notify when misconduct allegations are made, or any sort of reports are brought? Because sometimes for many of us, HR is the quickest way to find yourself in the hot seat and to find yourself dealing with blowback for bringing up any sort of allegations. So what's the reporting system like? What are the rights that women have in this place? Or are they aware of who they can talk to if there is allegations, or if there is issues going on in the workplace? What are some other questions to ask? I would honestly ask, what's the ratio of men to women? You can find out a lot by who's in power. You can find out if there is women in power. Is there women on their board? Is there women in senior level leadership? Is there women making decisions, not just performatively having power, but actually having power and able to use it and call shots? Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that too, Katelyn.
No, I think a lot of what you've listed there is really good. Certainly looking at positions of power, is there either gender equity or some attempt at gender equity? Is there a place for women in positions of leadership? And not that women can't also abuse power or kind of protect men who are abusing their power, but is there a sense that at least gender equity is a goal? I think about policies around like flexible work leave for women who are raising children. Is there responsiveness when women ask about policies, or is there a shutting down? Sometimes it's like, well, this is what we have on the book and that's just the way it is. And thankfully I have seen in some organizations I've been a part of that there's almost like, oh, we didn't even think that might benefit women, but now that someone mentions it, like, of course we'll create a flexible work policy around paid leave, or like having a nursing room in the building.
Finding out what a woman's experience is in working there and being able to ask. I think so many of us, we sit in rooms with HR or hiring committees, and we don't have any clues of what it would really like to work for that organization. Also check Glassdoor. look, and you're able to check and see honest reviews of what it's like to work there anonymously, that's a really valuable resource. I mean, if you really want to go there, you could even call the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and see if there's ever been claims filed with them about this organization that you might, or business or what have you. I mean, that's definitely next level. But there's something else you said. I don't know if it was an interview or a tweet. Who knows? I've it was a while ago that you said this, but you said, when you're in an interview, think, would I want to like be friends with these people? Would I want to go on vacation with these people? I don't know if you remember you said that, but I thought, man, I know, again, I understand the privilege that comes with even, you know, being able to have that. So I wanted to say that we understand that. But I think if I would have even just used that little measurement, I think I would have said, you know what? I don't know that I would want to, I don't know that I see myself here, or I could, the level of connection, or the way that men are talking to women in this interview right now. I don't know that I could, I don't know that I would, I would go looking for that, you know? But again, that's if you have, you know, other options and different things like that, but that's something to look for.
Yeah. It goes without saying that a lot of these steps kind of assume a level of privilege to be able to speak up and ask questions and get insider information, and that's not available for all women who are looking into potential jobs. But
yeah, I also want to say this is something that I talk about just a little bit in Pray Tell, but has really come up, especially with Ravi. He's of Indian descent, and then everything that's happened in Atlanta. It's interesting as a South Asian woman. We are that model minority in America. You know, South Asian Indians, South Asians, but specifically Indians in America, make up the highest earning bracket in America. More than white people, more than any other people group. You know, we didn't come over here by force. We came over here by choice in the 70s due to the medical shortage, and then again in the early 2000s during the tech boom. And so you see a lot of privileged, resourced Indian women. And so it's in the workplace. And so for me, it was interesting, the expectations on me as an Indian woman, and what was expected, and the compliance and the subservience, but also the level of intellect and education and ability and willingness to do the job no matter what, because we're hard workers. So just again, it goes back to that stereotypes of what's expected of women, but also being able to say, well, what are my expectations of this institution? What are my expectations of this church or this business or what have you? Being willing to not just be defined by someone else's expectations, but being willing to have expectations of the environment around you. And again, many of us were not conditioned that way. We just weren't. We were like, get what you can, work work twice as hard for half as much. You're a woman. Be lucky you're in the room. Don't speak up. And I think even, excuse me for this little tangent, but even the vernacular that we have of sexual harassment, misogyny, sexism, sexual assault, those terms that are common language now, that really didn't come on the scene until the late 60s, early 70s. And we have, RBGs in part to thank for that, and the work of so many lawmakers who were women, to really give women their rights and give women vernacular and understanding and voice to their experiences. And so you see how women who were born in the 40s and 50s, the likelihood of them willing to report misconduct in the workplace, I don't just mean sexual, I mean time, space, and body, right? That exploitation of their time, their space, and their body. Bringing those claims, there was maybe 12 to 14%, and I talk about this in Pray Tell toward the end of the book. And then that next generation of women, it pops up to like 40%. And then now millennials, exennials, and definitely certainly Gen Z, it's up to, like, if they see something, they're starting to say something, it's up to like 75% are seeing themselves as like, no, I have an obligation to myself and to other women and to this organization to say something and to spot this and to call it out. And until we do that, until we all see ourselves as part of the answer, because a lot of us, we will be bystanders, we won't be in the hot seat. We have to see ourselves as part of the solution, not my circus, not my monkeys. This isn't my job to speak up. It is, because when we do, we can call to the carpet those who are abusing their power, and we can demand equitable spaces in the places we work and worship.
That's a really good point. I'm really glad that you brought that up, Tiffany. That's such a strong theme of your book, the role of the bystander. And how tempting it might be to think, well, it's not happening to me, or, you know, I'm comfortable in my role. I don't want to lose the opportunities I have. But seeing yourself, everybody implicated in a system or a culture as being responsible for shaping that system and culture, and for trying to right wrongs, taking responsibility, not just like getting into kind of a blinkered position because it's just about me and getting by. It really takes a community kind of perspective and effort to create healthy cultures and healthy organizations.
Yeah. Belinda Bowman, the co-creator of Silence is Not Spiritual movement, she is famous for saying silence is violence. Silence is violence. That's some strong language, I know, and that's definitely not something I would lean toward, but she's right. She's absolutely right. Silence can turn into violence when we aren't advocating for a woman's space.
I want to end with a question about, there have been so many great questions and we were not able to get to all of them.
And I'm sure I answer many of them in the book. It's 50,000 words, people. I was long-winded. I'm sure that.
Yes. Well, actually, just on that point, like someone asks about Matthew 18 and the rule about going to the person. You address that in the book. So yes, I would obviously recommend for anybody who has stayed with us tonight and asked these really great questions to get Tiffany's book. And I wanted to end with this question. Why should men read this book? And why should people who are attending here buy a book, buy a copy for a man in their life?
Yeah, because this issue isn't a feminist issue, Katelyn. This issue isn't a left issue, a right issue, a young girl's issue, an old lady's issue. This is an everyone issue. And half the world is men. And it is going to take both men and women working together and understanding how they have benefited from these systems, architected these systems, perpetuated these systems, and how they can play a key role in eradicating broken systems that harm women. We can't do this without men. We can't do this without partnership. It requires mutuality, and reciprocity.
Yeah, I can think of some men I'd like to give this book to.
I will say
to really put to lie the notion that this is just an issue that women can solve on their own, because of the systems because of patriarchal systems. Men are often listened to and respected and heard and validated when something is going wrong in a way that the women who might be the most affected are not. I mean, that's just the way the reality.
I often say we hold up a man's accolades over a woman's accusations. We are willing to believe one woman, and until many women come forward with similar stories of misconduct or harm, we're not willing to listen. And it's so necessary that we work together. In fact, I kid you not, my DMs have been flooded on Instagram with women saying, oh, now I'm reading this with my husband, or, oh, I just bought a copy for my brother, or I just bought a copy for my pastor. And may it be so, may it be so. And I remember, Katelyn, when you and I were talking about who's our audience, who's our primary audience, who's our secondary audience. And we want women to be enraged and empowered and emboldened to believe that they can speak up and that they can rally themselves with others who want collective goodness for all women. But we also believe that this is for men. And we can't solve this problem without men.
100%. Well, I am so grateful, Tiffany, not only for your time tonight, but for all the heart and soul that you poured into this book. It's obviously a labor of love. It's a difficult topic. It's a very personal topic. But I just join you in hoping that this book reaches the people it needs to reach, who are empowered and emboldened to use their voices for good. And so thank you so much for giving this book to us. It really is a gift. And again, I love the title. I love the cover. And there should be a link now in the chat. Becky with Baker Bookhouse has been really generous in dropping the link a few times. And so if you follow the link, bakerbookhouse.com, there is a 30% off deal.
Oh my goodness.
If you follow the link. So look for that in the chat function. And I believe we will have links to it when we're actually going to be able to publish this conversation online as well after the fact, and the link will be there as well. So thank you to all of you for your great questions, for sticking with us tonight, Thursday night. And we hope that you have a great evening and enjoy the book when you get your hands on it. Thanks,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thank you.